In our last episode, we followed the rise and fall of ancient Israel, from the arrival of the Israelites in Canaan to the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylonian forces under Nebuchadnezzar II. A nation shattered, its people exiled, its temple in ruins. But the story didn't end there. In this episode, we trace the history of ancient Israel from the Babylonian captivity to the Roman conquest of Jerusalem in 63 BC. Nebuchadnezzar II deported about a quarter of Judah's population to Babylon, but it didn't happen all at once. The first wave came in 597 BC, after the Babylonians captured Jerusalem. King Jehoiakim, his court, the nobility, soldiers, and skilled craftsmen were taken into exile. A second, larger deportation followed in 586 BC, this time targeting priests, aristocrats, and educated elites. In the end, Babylon took in the heart of Judean society, those with influence, knowledge, and resources. Back in Judah, many ordinary people remained, mostly farmers and small-scale artisans. The Babylonians put a man named Gedaliah in charge, but he was soon assassinated, throwing the region into more chaos. Fearing Babylonian revenge, some Judeans fled to Egypt. Then, famine struck the already devastated land, and Judah's population dropped to just 10% of what it had been before the conquest. Meanwhile, in Babylon, the exiles settled mostly in rural communities, where they managed to preserve their culture and religion. They worked as craftsmen, farmers, and traders. Many took part in building projects, and some even found success as merchants, scribes, or moneylenders, rising into the ranks of Babylonian society. The Old Testament tells of a prophet Daniel, a Judean who served as an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar II. While Daniel himself is likely a legendary figure, his story reflects the real memory of Judeans who rose to prominence in exile. During this period, Judean religious teachings began to take on a new form. Greater emphasis was placed on studying the Torah, prayer, and the creation of written religious texts. Monotheism grew significantly stronger. The tradition of the synagogue emerged, places for prayer and the study of scripture, which became the foundation of Judaism after the loss of the temple. Several biblical books, such as the Book of Ezekiel, were written during the exile. Babylon's rule over Judah, however, didn't last long. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar II, his dynasty fell into decline. The last great king of Babylon, Nabonidus, focused on religious reforms that angered the priesthood and the elite. He often left Babylon to live in the oasis of Tema, leaving the city under the care of his son, Belshazzar, who spent his time feasting and indulging in pleasures rather than governing. According to biblical tradition, during one of Belshazzar's feasts, a mysterious inscription appeared on the palace wall, foretelling the fall of the kingdom. That very night, in 539 BC, the Persian king Cyrus the Great entered Babylon without resistance. Cyrus the Great, known for his policy of religious tolerance, allowed the Judeans to return home and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of a new era in the history of the Jewish people. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Empire. We actually have a whole video about it. Link should be somewhere on the screen here. One of the defining features of Cyrus's rule was his tolerant attitude toward local religions and cults. In 538 BC, he issued a decree allowing the Judeans to return to Canaan and rebuild. He also ordered the return of sacred temple artifacts that had been kept in the Babylonian treasury and provided resources for the reconstruction. Babylonian Jews had mixed reactions to the decree. Some chose to return to their ancestral homeland, while others stayed in Babylon, where a large and established Jewish diaspora had already formed. The first group of returnees set out for Judah in 537 BC. They were led by Zerubbabel, whom Cyrus appointed as governor, and a high priest named Yeshua. What they found was a devastated land, inhabited mostly by farmers who had survived the Babylonian conquest. In the ruins of Jerusalem, their first act was to rebuild the altar on the site of the destroyed temple to resume sacrificial worship. A year later, Zerubbabel ceremoniously laid the foundation of the second temple. But rebuilding the temple wasn't easy. For one, the region was surrounded by nomadic tribes, mostly Arabs and Arameans, who raided Judean settlements from time to time. As the prophet Nehemiah put it, the Jews had to rebuild with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. There was also growing tension with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were descendants of Israelites from the former northern kingdom who had maintained a distinct religious and ethnic identity. Over time, they had intermingled with peoples resettled in Samaria by the Assyrians, and their religious practices had become more syncretic. Most critically, they believed that Mount Gerizim near the city of Shechem, not the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, was the only legitimate place for a temple. This led to serious conflict. On one side, the Judeans didn't consider the Samaritans to be true Jews and refused to let them take part in rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. On the other, the Samaritans saw themselves as the rightful heirs of Israelite tradition and actively tried to obstruct the construction. They even appealed to the Persian authorities, accusing the Judeans of planning to restore an independent kingdom. As a result, the Persian administration cut off funding, and the building project came to a halt. In the meantime, the Samaritans built their own temple on Mount Gerizim, which they believed was the original site of Yahweh's altar, built by Moses himself. Now, it wasn't until 522 BC, when Darius I came to power, that the situation changed. The new king, seeking to stabilize the empire, ordered construction of the Second Temple to resume. In 515 BC, the temple was completed and consecrated. Though it matched Solomon's temple in size, it was far less impressive in decoration and sacred furnishings. This version of events is how the story is told in the Tanakh. In truth, there's very little direct evidence to confirm its historical accuracy. What we do know for certain is this: Cyrus issued a general decree allowing all displaced peoples, not just the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their places of worship. And we know that by the early 5th century BC, a temple in Jerusalem definitely existed, mentioned by the Greek historian Hecataeus of Miletus. That timeline broadly matches the dates given in the Tanakh. Overall, the biblical narrative appears internally consistent and, for the most part, historically plausible, even if some elements are exaggerated or legendary. In 458 BC, Nehemiah was appointed governor of Judah. Before that, he had served as cupbearer to the Persian king Artaxerxes I. Around the same time, Ezra was made high priest, also appointed by the Persians. Together, they radically transformed the religious life of the Judean community through reforms that shaped the future of Judaism. They promoted strict monotheism and took a hard stance against any form of idolatry. Ezra banned intermarriage with non-Jews and ordered all Judean men to divorce their foreign wives, even those who had already had children with them. This sparked strong opposition, and unsurprisingly, many refused to comply. Still, over time, the Jewish community began to more strictly separate itself from surrounding peoples. Ezra also made the public reading of the Torah a regular ritual. He organized assemblies where the people listened to the law and were taught its meaning. Nehemiah focused on strengthening temple worship and tightening observance of the Sabbath. He enforced a total halt of labor and commerce on that day, punishing anyone who broke the law. Determined to make the Jerusalem temple the heart of Jewish religious life, he required the people to bring offerings and established a clear hierarchy among the priests. In 332 BC, the greatest conqueror of the ancient world, Alexander the Great, arrived in the Near East. He overthrew the Achaemenid Empire and took control of Judah along with it. When it came to dealing with local peoples, Alexander followed Achaemenid traditions. He respected local customs and religions, and so he did not interfere with Jewish religious life. According to Jewish tradition, Alexander was met by the high priest, who persuaded him not to enter the temple in Jerusalem. Alexander agreed and instead supported the temple with generous donations. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, a power struggle broke out among his generals, the Diadochi. As a result, Judah came under the control of the Egyptian Ptolemaic dynasty. For about a century, the Ptolemies maintained stability in the region and continued the policy of non-interference in Jewish religious affairs. Under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek. This version became known as the Septuagint. Greek culture gradually began to influence Judean society. Cities saw the rise of gymnasiums, theaters, and Hellenistic administrative institutions. Many Jews, especially from elite families, embraced Greek customs, fashion, and philosophy. This created tension between urban areas, where Hellenization was taking root, and the rural population, which remained loyal to traditional Judaism. In the early 2nd century BC, Judah came under the control of the Seleucid dynasty, which ruled over Syria and Mesopotamia. Antiochus III the Great followed a policy of religious tolerance. He supported the temple in Jerusalem and even exempted its staff from paying taxes. But his son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, took a very different approach. Determined to accelerate the Hellenization of the region, he imposed harsh restrictions on Jewish religious practices. He banned circumcision, Sabbath observance, and the study of the law. In a shocking act of provocation, he ordered a pig to be sacrificed on the altar of the Jerusalem temple and rededicated the temple to Zeus. This religious crackdown sparked outrage among the Jews, especially in rural areas. In 167 BC, a priest named Mattathias Hasmonean from the town of Modin refused to offer a sacrifice to pagan gods and killed the Seleucid official who demanded it. This act ignited the Maccabean revolt, led by his sons, most notably Judah Maccabee. They launched a guerrilla campaign, attacking Seleucid garrisons and gradually gaining strength. In 164 BC, they recaptured Jerusalem and restored worship in the temple. However, the rebels didn't have universal support among the Jewish population. In many ways, they had to fight not only against the Seleucids, but also against their Hellenized compatriots. In the cities, many Jews continued to embrace Greek culture, while the Maccabees sought to restore the religious purity of Judaism. A striking example was the Greek fortress of the Acra, built by Antiochus Epiphanes in Jerusalem. When the Maccabees retook the city, the Greek military garrison took refuge inside the fortress. It remained under Greek control for more than 20 years, something that could have only been possible with the support from part of the local population. Internal strife within the Seleucid Empire worked in the rebels' favor. In 153 BC, a dynastic crisis sparked a civil war between Demetrius II and Alexander Belus. The Jews shifted their support between the rival claimants, using the chaos to their advantage. They also formed alliances with the Roman Republic and even with Sparta. In 134 BC, the Seleucid king Antiochus VII laid siege to Jerusalem. The Judeans were forced to negotiate a peace agreement that effectively made them an independent state, though formally they still acknowledged Seleucid authority. However, the territory under their control remained limited to a small portion of the former kingdom of Judah and parts of Transjordan. It's still unclear why Antiochus agreed to a compromise with the Jews while holding Jerusalem under siege and enjoying clear military superiority. One possible reason was the Roman factor. The Jews were allies of the Roman Republic, which may have deterred harsher action. Another likely reason was strategic. Antiochus may have preferred to keep the Jews as allies in a looming conflict with the Parthian Empire. That war broke out in 130 BC and began favorably for Antiochus. He managed to drive the Parthians out of Mesopotamia, but in the mountainous terrain near Ecbatana, his army was ambushed, surrounded, and nearly annihilated. Antiochus died in battle alongside his troops. After the king's death, the Seleucid Empire plunged into chaos. Taking advantage of the situation, the ruler of Judah, John Hyrcanus, grandson of Matthias Hasmonean, declared full independence for the Judean state. The first rulers of the Hasmonean dynasty did not call themselves kings. Instead, they took the title of ethnarchs, meaning rulers of the people, in order to respect the ancient tradition that only a descendant of King David could be king of the Jews. Still, their rule had all the characteristics of monarchy. In addition to their political power, the Hasmoneans also held the office of high priest. Never before in Israel's history had secular and religious authority been concentrated in a single person. For this reason, the Hasmonean state is often described as a theocracy. After freeing Judah from Seleucid control, John Hyrcanus launched a series of military campaigns to expand its territory. He benefited from the fact that the Seleucid Empire, gripped by internal crisis, had effectively lost control over the land of Canaan. Hyrcanus conquered large areas to the north and east, brought the regions of Gilead and Moab back under Judean rule, and even captured Samaria, destroying the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. John Hyrcanus' greatest success was the conquest of Idumia. According to legend, the Idumeans were descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, the patriarch of the Israelites, who sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. While clearly this is a myth, the Idumeans were in fact a closely related people to the Jews. Their culture, language, and way of life were very similar. During the Babylonian exile, the Idumeans expanded northward and took control of parts of the former kingdom of Judah, including the city of Hebron, the first capital of King David, since the remaining population in the region was too weak to resist them. Trade was the main source of income for the Idumeans, as they controlled key routes that brought Arabian incense and spices to the Mediterranean. These trade routes were Hyrcanus' primary target. Around 112 to 110 BC, John Hyrcanus launched a campaign against Idumea. He destroyed its major cities, including Marcia and Adullam, both important defensive strongholds, and captured Hebron. Thanks to his numerical superiority and a well-organized army, Hyrcanus quickly defeated the Idumeans and forced them into submission. The most significant outcome of Hyrcanus' campaign was that he forced the Idumeans to convert to Judaism. Up until this point, Judaism had never spread through military conquest. Hyrcanus gave the Idumeans a choice: either convert to Judaism and keep their land, or leave the territory of Judea. Most chose conversion, though many fled to the Nabatean kingdom and Egypt. During the Hasmonean period, two major sects emerged within Judaism: the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees advocated for a strict literal interpretation of Mosaic law, while the Pharisees interpreted the Torah more flexibly, adapting it to contemporary life. For example, the Sadducees understood the biblical commandment, "You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk," literally, only forbidding that specific act. In contrast, the Pharisees interpreted it more broadly and as a general ban on mixing meat and dairy, a practice that became a hallmark of later Jewish dietary law. Hyrcanus eventually came into conflict with the Pharisees, who believed he had no right to wield both secular and religious power. As tensions grew, he began to align himself with the Sadducees, who were a part of the religious elite and had control over the temple treasury. In 104 BC, Hyrcanus died, and his son Aristobulus became the next ruler. His reign was short and remembered mostly for its brutality. He killed his younger brother Antigonus, starved his own mother to death in prison, and broke with tradition by not declaring himself the ethnarch, but king. In 103 BC, he fell ill and died just after 1 year on the throne. He was succeeded by another one of his brothers, Alexander Jannaeus. Jannaeus continued Hyrcanus' expansionist policies. He annexed Galilee, Gilead, and Etruria to the west, and converted the inhabitants of these regions to Judaism. He also conquered Philistia and pushed the southern border further by capturing parts of the Nabatean kingdom, including the city of Petra. Under Alexander Jannaeus, the territory of Judea came close to matching the borders of the ancient kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Solomon. But perhaps Alexander Jannaeus left his greatest mark not in foreign affairs, but in domestic policy. He was a staunch supporter of the Sadducee sect and openly despised the Pharisees. During the celebration of the festival of Sukkot, he provoked a confrontation with the Pharisaic community and ordered a mass slaughter of Pharisees. Several thousand were killed right in the temple. In response, the Pharisees launched a rebellion with support from the king of Syria, Demetrius III, and even managed to defeat Jannaeus' army. However, when Demetrius had to withdraw back to Syria, Jannaeus unleashed brutal repression, massacring tens of thousands of Pharisees across the country. According to Josephus, he had 800 Pharisee leaders crucified, and before executing them, he ordered their wives and children to be killed right before their eyes. After Alexander Jannaeus died in 76 BC, his widow, Queen Salome Alexandra, took power. She managed to temporarily stabilize the situation by reconciling the Pharisees and the Sadducean elite. She restored Pharisee influence in the temple and in state affairs. However, after her death in 67 BC, a power struggle broke out between her two sons, John Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Hyrcanus, the elder son, held the title of high priest and had support of the Pharisees. However, he was weak-willed and lacked authority over the military. In contrast, Aristobulus, the younger son of Alexander Jannaeus, was energetic and ambitious. He had the backing of the Sadducean elite and the army. Aristobulus mobilized his forces, and Hyrcanus, unable to resist, was forced to abdicate the throne in exchange for a promise of safety. Aristobulus became both king and high priest of Judea. Although Hyrcanus seemed to accept his new position in the background, he quickly fell under the influence of Antipater II, the ruler of Idumea. Antipater convinced Hyrcanus that his life was in danger and urged him to seek help from Atreus III, king of the Nabateans. The Nabateans agreed and provided Hyrcanus with an army, which alongside his supporters marched against Aristobulus. The conflict between the brothers reignited, and soon Jerusalem was under siege by Nabatean forces. The Romans, who were increasingly involved in Middle Eastern affairs at the time, took advantage of the situation. In 63 BC, Gnaeus Pompey the Great arrived in Judea. Both brothers appealed to him for support, but Pompey chose to back Hyrcanus, viewing the weak and pliable Hyrcanus as a more convenient ally for Rome than the headstrong and ambitious Aristobulus. Pompey marched on Jerusalem, and after a 3-month siege, captured the city. Aristobulus was taken prisoner along with his sons and sent to Rome. Hyrcanus was reinstated as ethnarch and high priest of Judea, but now under Roman protection. This effectively marked the end of the independent Hasmonean state. Thanks so much for watching. If you've made it this far, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel if you like more content like this in your feeds. If you haven't caught part 1 yet, you could check that out here. We've also got a part 3 coming up here shortly as well. If you'd like to support the channel and help us make more videos like this, consider joining us on Patreon. You'll get early access to new episodes, work-in-progress updates, and more. Every bit of support goes a long way. Thank you so much. We hope to see you again next time.